بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So continuing from last week where we started talking about the hijrah, right? We spoke about the details and the events that led to the hijrah of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ along with Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu and his servant Amir ibn Fuhayra and their guide Abdullah ibn Urayqit, right? And we mentioned the whole plot that they did, right? They left at night after the Quraysh came and surrounded the house. They went to the cave of Thawr, and then they began their journey towards Yathrib, which would later be called Medina. Now, on the way to Yathrib, we have several stories that took place, several incidents that we find narrated through different authentic hadith and found also in the books of Seerah. So Abu Bakr as-Siddiq actually is of the people who gave us some information about the Hijrah. And it appears that later on he was asked by some of the Ansar, some of the Sahaba. This is, by the way, recorded in Sahih al-Bukhari. And subhanAllah, this is a narration that I love, by the way. If you want to summarize the love that Abu Bakr as-Siddiq has for Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, honestly, you just go and read this narration. It just tells it all to you. And he begins and he says, أسرينا ليلتنا ومن الغد حتى قام قائم الظهيرة وخلى الطريق لا يمر فيه أحد. So he's basically saying, we traveled all night. This is probably after they left the cave. He said, we traveled all night until the next morning. And until basically Dhuhr time. We continued traveling until the sun was at its peak. It was very, very hot. And there was no shade. We couldn't find any shade, and there was no one on the road as well. So he doesn't say it, but he's implying like we were very tired, we were hungry, we were thirsty, we were this and that. So they were looking for a place to rest. فرفعت لنا صخرة طويلة لها ظل لم يأتي عليها الشمس فنزلنا عندها. So he says, we saw in the distance as we were traveling, in the distance we saw this big rock or big boulder that had some shade at least from the sun. So we decided to go and stay and basically camp at that rock until the sun goes down a little bit, just because the heat of the desert and the sun of the desert is pretty intense. So he says, وسويت للنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم مكانا بيدي ينام عليه وبسطت عليه فروة وقلت نم يا رسول الله وأنا أنفض ما حولك. So he says, I went to the rock. This is Abu Bakr as-Siddiq speaking. I went to the rock and I found a suitable place next to the rock, and I flattened it out with my hands. Like I flattened out a place where Prophet Muhammad ﷺ can rest. So I flattened it out, and I took a piece of leather or some kind of skin that he had, and he laid it on the ground. And he went to Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and he told him, Ya Rasulullah, you sleep and I will stay awake and I will keep watch. And so Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he went to sleep while Abu Bakr as-Siddiq stayed awake. And while Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was awake keeping watch and looking around, he saw in the distance someone walking in the desert, and it appeared to be a shepherd. So someone who had a flock of sheep or goats or whatever. He was taking care of his flock. So Abu Bakr as-Siddiq walks up to this man, seeing that he has all of these cattle. So he asks him, أَفِي غَنَمِكَ لَبَنٍ? Do any of your sheep hold any milk in them? So the guy says, yes. So Abu Bakr as-Siddiq says, can I have some milk from you? And the guy says, yes. فأخذ شاة فحلب في قعب كثبة من لبن ومعي إداوة حملتها للنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يرتوي فيها يشرب ويتوضأ. So he's basically saying, I had a small vessel with me, a small container, which Prophet Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم would usually use to drink or to make wudu from. So I had that with me. I would carry it for him. So I took that and I basically filled it with some fresh milk. Then I came back to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who was still sleeping while all of this was happening. فَكَرِهْتُ أَنْ أُوقِظَهُ. I didn't want to wake him up. So I left him sleeping. فَوَافَقْتُهُ حَتَّى اسْتَيْقَظَ. I left him sleeping and I stayed next to him until he opened his eyes and woke up. When he woke up, فَصَبَبْتُ مِنَ الْمَاءِ عَلَى اللَّبَنِ حَتَّى بَرَدَ أَسْفَلُهُ. And so I took the milk, which I took earlier, and I poured on top of it some cold water that I had, making some kind of cold drink for Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he says, here you go, drink from this. فَشَرِبَ حَتَّى رَضِيتُ. He drank until I felt satisfied. And then we left together, and after the sun had went down a little bit. Now, subhanallah, this narration, when I first read this, the first thing that came to my mind, the hadith, authentic hadith, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى أكون أحب إليه من أهله وماله ومن الناس أجمعين. None of you shall be believers. None of you believe until you love me, meaning Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, more than you love your own money, more than you love your family, more than you love anyone else. Now, when you first go and read this hadith, you're like, okay, maybe there's a little bit of exaggeration over here. And okay, it's just emphasizing that you should have some love for Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, it doesn't have to be, I love my parents, I love, this person, I love my spouse, right? لا يؤمن أحدكم. Subhanallah. And then you read this narration about Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and how he is acting around Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you honestly get to see the manifestation of this hadith. You honestly get to see, first you think it's not possible. How can I love someone that much? And then you read about Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and what he's doing. And you're like, subhanallah. Where are we and where is he? Two different dimensions, two different planets. And subhanallah, first of all, keep in mind, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he's telling us this narration when one of the Sahaba asked him. In all likelihood, we don't really know this for sure, but in all likelihood, he's being questioned this several years after the Hijrah. Now, he could have simplified the whole trip. Instead of saying, oh, we traveled and it was sunny and then we found a rock, he could have just said, oh, we left the cave of Thawr and then we traveled night and morning and then we rested by this rock and we took a break and then we continued. Khalas. But subhanAllah, he's giving you the tiniest of details. He's telling you, we arrived. We were walking. We didn't have anything. We were tired. The sun was at its peak. We saw a rock. I flattened it out with my hands. And then I put a water skin. Then I went and he slept. Then I went and I found a shepherd. Then I did this. Then I did that. He's telling you, he's quoting you every single tiny piece of details. Who cares about these tiny details? But this is how Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, this is, subhanAllah, when you express your love to someone, it's in these small things, wallahi. It's always in these small things that a person's love truly shows out. Like what? Like, let me go smoothen the ground for you. What is that? Just, let him go sleep. He knows how to flatten the floor. No, let me go smoothen the ground for you. Let me put an animal skin. You're out in the desert. What are you doing is an animal skin? No. Maybe I'll make him more comfortable. Let me pour him some cold water on top of his milk so he drinks his milk cold. And Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he used to love cold drinks in general. SubhanAllah. When you take this effort into perspective, you truly get to see the love of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. And notice how in this entire narration, he doesn't even say anything about himself. It doesn't say, oh, well, for me, as for Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he slept. As for me, I also took some time, I rested. I also drank some milk. I also said, no. It's like he's like, you guys don't care about me. Khalas, he's the main focus right now. He's not giving any attention for himself. He drank until I became satisfied. What kind of obsession is this? That he, yeah, wallahi, what can we say about this? That he drank and he's watching him drinking until I felt satisfied. I felt full. This is another level of love. And we ask Allah to grant us the genuine love of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, such that we may truly become believers. Anyways, this was one of the incidents that happened throughout the Hijrah. Now, in the same hadith, this hadith was, by the way, all in Sahih Bukhari. In the same hadith, it talks about the next person, the next encounter that we're going to talk about, and that is the encounter with a person by the name of Suraqa Ibn Malik. Now, the story of Suraqa Ibn Malik, it is found in several different ahadith and in several different books. The authentic ahadith only give you small snippets of the story. The books of Seerah, they may not have the full authentic isnad, but they give us some more details about what happened in the story. So we're just going to jump into right into what the books of Seerah go ahead and say. And so Suraqa Ibn Malik, he himself says he's the one who's narrating the story because he later converted to Islam. He says لما خرج رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من مكة مهاجرا إلى المدينة جعلت قريش فيه 100 ناقة لمن رده عليهم. We spoke about this last week, that when the Prophet Muhammad left Quraysh and he was able to escape them, they put a bounty of 100 camels on his head for anyone who catches them. So Suraqa was of the people who was greedy and he wanted this reward for himself. فبينما أنا جالس في نادي قومي إذ أقبل رجل منا حتى وقف علينا فقال والله لقد رأيت ركبهم ثلاثة مروا علي آنفة إني لا أراه محمدا وأصحابه. So he's basically saying, I was one day chilling with my tribe. Suraqa ibn Malik, by the way, he's not from Quraysh. He's from a different tribe. He's from the tribe of Ju'sham. That's the name of the tribe. So it's like a Bedouin or Arab tribe, not from Quraysh. So, and Suraqa ibn Malik was one of the leaders of that tribe. So he's saying, one day I was just sitting down. We heard the news about this bounty, but he was just sitting, chilling. A man then came, as Suraqa ibn Malik was sitting with his people. And he said out loud that I just saw 3 people pass by. Okay, I just saw 3 people travel. And I think this is Muhammad and his companions. So Suraqa hears this news, and once again he gets greedy. He wants the reward for himself. He doesn't want to share it. Sharing is not caring, right? So he says, إنما هم بنو فلان يبتغون ضالة لهم. Oh, so he is, oh no, that's not them. That was probably some just a group from the tribe of such and such, and they were just going on an expedition. So it's not Muhammad ﷺ and his companions. ثم مكثت قليلا. So he says, so he just tells the people, just false alarm. This is not them. And he says, I waited a little bit. ثم قمت فدخلت بيتي ثم أمرت بفرسي فقيد لي إلى بطن الوادي وأمرت بسلاحي. As soon as things calmed down a little bit, I sneaked to my house. I prepared my horse. I prepared my armor, prepared my weapons, prepared everything, and I galloped as fast as possible to catch these people, because he knows that this is Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. ثم أخرجت قداحي فاستقسمت بها. So he has, we mentioned this very early on, that of the traditions of the pagans, it's that they have something called the azlam. They would have this kind of tradition where, like, if it's okay. It's like to summarize it, it's like the istikhara for pagans. Okay, that's how they do their istikhara. They have a bunch of like arrows, featherless arrows, and something, and they throw them, and then if it appears in a certain weird way, then that means it's a yes, and in other ways it's a no, right? That kind of thing. It's like flipping a coin. So again, they had their own, and of course this is completely haram. But anyways, he says, I brought out my arrows, my azlam, and I threw them to ask, astaghfirullah, like asking the gods, like, what should I do, right? فخرج السهم الذي أكره لا يضره. And so the result came out was against what I wanted. So my Azlam told me, don't follow them. Don't go after them. وكنت أرجو أن أرده على قريش فأخذ المئة الناقة. He says again, I wanted the 100 camels, like I want to be the one who brings them back to Quraysh. So I chased after them. I ignored what my Azlam told me and I chased after them. فبينما فرسي يشتد بي عثر بي فسقطت عنه. And as my horse was galloping faster and faster and I was catching up to them, all of a sudden my horse, its feet sunk, or it tripped and stumbled, and so the horse fell and Suraqa went flying off his horse and he fell down. And so as he fell down, he's confused, like what just happened? For the second time, he takes out his Azlam and he threw them again. And once again, the same result. Don't follow them. But he ignored it. And he went again. And he closed in the distance again, galloped after them. Once again, the horse stumbled, it fell, he fell. He threw the Azlam again. Don't follow them. Nope, I want to follow them. So he follows them again for the third time now. And now he was closing in the distance, and this time the horse fell again, and this was even more violent. And he fell, and he really fell a violent falling. And so at this point, subhanAllah, it took him a few smacks in the head to realize that there was something beyond him acting. There was something that he didn't understand that was preventing him from coming any closer to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he himself narrates this. فَعَرَفْتُ حِينَ رَأَيْتُ ذَلِكَ أَنَّهُ قَدْ مُنِعَ مِنِّي وَأَنَّهُ ظَاهِرٌ. I knew at this point in time, he was being protected from me, and he was going to be victorious in whatever matter he's about to go to do. So he says, I called out to them now. So now khalas, he's given up on chasing. He simply wants to talk to them. So he says, I called out to them, and he says, أنا سراقة ابن مالك بن جعشم انظروني أكلمكم فوالله لا أريبكم ولا يأتيكم مني شيء تكرهونه. That he's telling them, guys, this is me, Suraqa Ibn Malik. I promise you, I'm not going to do anything anymore. I'm not going to chase you. I'm not going to harm you. I'm a safe person. Can you give me permission to come close? Because he realizes, as long as they're moving, he's not going to be able to come any closer. He's like, you got to give me permission to come closer. So Abu Bakr, Prophet Muhammad instructs Abu Bakr, see what's going on with him. So Abu Bakr Siddiq asks Suraqa, and he asks, what do you want with us? What do you want from us? So Suraqa replies, تكتب لي كتابا يكون آية بيني وبينك. I want you to write down, subhanAllah, flip 180 degrees. He went to go and kill Prophet Muhammad and capture him. And now he's saying, I want a written protection from you. So that when Islam spreads, basically, once you are victorious, I have protection from you. And so Prophet Muhammad told Abu Bakr Siddiq, write it for him. So he wrote on a piece of parchment or something, the promise of protection, promising Suraqa safety. There's also an additional detail mentioned. This is now in a different narration. It's a little bit of a weaker narration. The hadith here is mursal. Brothers probably learned what is mursal hadith, right? Okay. So it's a little bit of a weaker hadith, but where it says that Prophet Muhammad spoke to Suraqa, and he said to him, كيف بك إذا لبست سواري كسرى. How would you be, O Suraqa, if you were to wear the bracelets of Kisra ibn Hormuz, the Persian emperor? Now, this is, of course, something unbelievable that's being said. This is something unthinkable. Like, who is Suraqa, okay, leader of some small tribe, to wear the bracelets of the king of the Persian Empire? This is something unthinkable. So Suraqa couldn't really say anything back to that. Now, in the same narration, Ibn Ishaq, he mentions, after the conquest of Mecca, so now this is fast forwarding several years later, and after conquering Mecca and the neighboring tribes, and especially also after the Battle of Hunayn and the Battle of Ta'if, where a lot of the tribes got conquered, Suraqa's tribe also got conquered. And when the conquest took place, a lot of these people who got captured. A lot of these people who were conquered were captured as prisoners. And at that moment in time, they were put in a location called Al-Ji'irana. Al-Ji'irana. And Suraqa was there. Suraqa was there with his people. And so Suraqa asks for Prophet Muhammad ﷺ as he was held as a prisoner. And so he brings out that same parchment that was written more than 8 years back or so. And he says, "This is the promise of protection you gave me from that day." And so Prophet Muhammad tells him, "A promise is a promise, and we're gonna uphold our promise." And so he freed Suraqa and his people. And of course, at that moment in time, Suraqa was giving the da'wah, and Suraqa had accepted Islam as well. And he became a well-known Sahabi. He then migrated to Medina. And subhanAllah, within only a few years after the death of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, the Persian Empire would get conquered. Kisra ibn Hormuz would get defeated. And the palace of Kisra would get entered by the Muslims at the time of Umar al-Khattab radiallahu anhu. And once the treasures of Kisra were all there, Umar al-Khattab remembered, probably he was told that Prophet ﷺ told Suraqa ibn Malik, "How would you be if you wore the bracelets of Kisra?" So he said, "Bring me Suraqa ibn Malik." And so he calls Suraqa ibn Malik and he gives him the bracelets of Kisra. And he tells him, "Irfa' yadayk وقل الحمد لله الذي سلبهما كسرى بن هرمز وألبسهما سراقة الأعرابي." That, O Suraqa, raise your hand, meaning thank Allah Azza wa Jal that He has taken these bracelets from the hands of Kisra bin Hormuz and He has granted them in the hands of Suraqa the Bedouin. So this is the incident of Suraqa ibn Malik. Of the stories as well that took place during the Hijrah is the story of an elderly woman by the name of Umm Ma'bad. And this is also narrated by her. She also was of the people that most likely she converted to Islam. And this is found in many different books, At-Tabarani, Ibn Hisham, and other Seerah books as well. That Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, Amir bin Fuhayra, Abdullah ibn al-Wayqit, they passed by the tent of an elderly woman. She was an elderly Bedouin woman. She was living in a tent by the name of Ma'bad. And she was described as, being a bright and an intelligent lady despite her age, and that she was strong as well. And this is overall the quality of the Bedouin people. They're tough people. They can withstand tough conditions. So anyhow, Ma'bad, she lived with her husband. They were overall pretty poor family. I mean, they lived in a tent, right? And they had some goats, and she was basically her whole day was just water. The husband would try to find food and water, and then she would also take care of the cattle. So they arrive at the tent of Ma'bad, and at that point, the narration mentions that they were also out of food, and they were also hungry. So they asked Ma'bad, "Do you have any food or any meat or any milk or anything that we can buy off you, so that we can eat and drink?" But she said, "I got nothing to give you. Sorry." فنظر رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إلى شاة في كسر الخيمة. That Prophet ﷺ, he took a look around the tent and he saw in the corner of the tent there was a goat. So he asks, "Why is this goat here?" So she says, خلفها الجهد عن الغنم. So it's just an old goat. خلاص, it's grown old. It's different from the other cattle. It stopped giving milk a long time ago. So he asks her, أتأذنين أن أحلبها? Can you give me permission for me to go to this goat and to milk this goat? And so she's like, "I just told you, this is an old goat. Doesn't produce any milk." So she says, and she probably didn't expect something to happen. She said, "You can go milk it. If some milk comes out, خلاص, I guess, if milk comes out, milk comes out. It is what it is." And she's thinking to herself, "There's no way it's an elderly goat and whatnot." فدعا بها رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فمسح بيده ضرعها وسمى الله عز وجل. So Prophet Muhammad, he stood there, he made a dua to Allah Azza wa Jal, and he rubbed his hand on the udder of this goat, and the udder filled with milk. And he milked the goat, and he, in fact, the narration mentions, a long narration, it mentions that he asked her, "Do you have a big container that I can use?" So he takes the big container and he fills the entire container with milk. And then he drinks, and his companions drink, and Umm Ma'bad drinks. And then they were like, we want more. So they go and they get seconds, and they all drink. And once they were done, he takes the bucket again and he fills it again from bottom to top. And he leaves it for Umm Ma'bad. And he says, Salaam alaikum. He just leaves. Now, Ma'bad is probably completely shocked. She doesn't understand what just happened or how it happened. And after a while after they left, her husband came back to the tent. So this was now Abu Ma'bad. So Abu Ma'bad then returned and he was shocked to see this bucket of milk. So he asks her, Min ayna laki hadha al-laban ya Umm Ma'bad? Where did you get all of this milk from? There is no goat that can produce this milk. We don't have such a goat. So she says, Marra bina rajulun mubarak. There was a blessed man who came and visited. And this is where I got my milk from. And then she gave a long description of Prophet Muhammad, which I'm not going to go through right now. But she described Prophet Muhammad to her husband. The husband appeared to have been coming from the direction of Mecca because he had heard also the news that there were certain men that Quraysh was after. So he says, هو والله صاحب قريش الذي ذكر لنا من أمره ما ذكر بمكة. That is the man, I'm sure from your description, that is the man that Quraysh is trying to come after. وَلَقَدْ هَمَمْتُ أَنْ أَصْحَبَهُ وَلَا أَفْعَلَنَّ إِنْ وَجَدْتُ إِلَى ذَلِكَ سَبِيلًا. That if I find a way to be able to follow him and to accompany him, then I shall definitely do so. So from this, it is implied that Ma'bad and Abu Ma'bad, both of them, they had accepted Islam. Another story that was mentioned also, that is mentioned, and this one is a small story, about the conversion of one of the Sahaba. His name is Burayda ibn al-Hasib. Burayda ibn al-Hasib al-Aslami. And some scholars comment on this, on some of the hadith about Burayda here, this one about his conversion, and they say it is a hadith matruk. Okay, and you guys learned what is matruk, right? Okay. So, but again, there is no harm in mentioning these kind of narrations when it comes to the seerah. But it's a similar idea to the points to the stories that we mentioned. Basically, Burayda, he hears the Quraysh announcement that there's 100 camels for whoever captures Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and so he gets greedy as well. And he doesn't just go by himself; he calls for backup as well. So he goes and he sets out with 70 of his tribe members to go after Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it appears from the narration that they caught up to them. But instead of panicking or running away, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam spoke to them, and he gave them da'wah, and they all converted to Islam. And that was basically the end of the story. And he just continued towards Medina. But it's an interesting narration that we learn from this, how Allah Azza wa Jal is muqallib al-qulub. Allah Azza wa Jal can change the condition of anyone without any notice. And subhanAllah, within 10 years or within 13 years in Mecca, Prophet Muhammad struggled to get Muslims to convert. Like 70 people. That took him several years to get 70 people to convert. And now, just like that, 70 people, he didn't even go after them. They came after him. And then they converted to Islam. And so this is how this is how Allah Azza wa Jal guides people. And how Allah Azza wa Jal guides people is beyond my understanding and your understanding. What is expected from me and you is to at least that we put the effort and do not trivialize any da'wah. We've said this many times already. Don't trivialize any opportunity you get to invite people to Islam. Also, it is mentioned in Al-Bukhari as well that on the way to Medina, certain caravans that they would pass by certain caravans, and some of them would recognize Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, but they would not recognize Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he said. So the hadith goes, and he says, "أقبل نبي الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إلى المدينة وهو مردف أبا بكر وأبو بكر شيخ يعرف ونبي الله صلى الله عليه وسلم شاب لا يعرف." So Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was, generally speaking, at this point in time, Abu Bakr was more well known than Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In Mecca, yes, everybody knows Prophet Muhammad, but outside Mecca, Abu Bakr was a businessman. Abu Bakr had connections. Okay, so he was more known, especially when it comes to traveling caravans, business caravans, right? And note, of course, that these caravans are not Quraysh caravans. So they're coming from different places. And so they don't know about this announcement, that they don't know that Abu Bakr is being is wanted in Mecca. فيلقى الرجل أبا بكر فيقول يا أبا بكر من هذا الرجل الذي بينك الذي بين يديك. So it mentions that sometimes a caravan would stop. A man from the caravan would talk to Abu Bakr Siddiq and he would ask him, who is that guy who's next to you? And so he would say, فيقول هذا الرجل يهديني السبيل. This is the man who is guiding me to the path. So you get what he did here, right? This is a white lie. This is a tawriya. It's a double meaning phrase. Okay, he's not lying. He's saying one thing, intending one thing, but the person in front of him understood something else. So he said, "This is my guide. This is the person guiding me to the path." So the person in front of him, he thinks, "Oh, that's his guide to wherever he is going, like his GPS, right?" But Abu Bakr he means that he's taking me to as-sirat al-mustaqim, that he's the one who is leading me to the straight path. So, and that was, by the way, the tradition of caravans back in the day, that when you are traveling in the desert and you don't see anyone, and then you find another caravan that's passing, usually the caravans kind of come close to each other and they give salam to one another and they relay whatever news they've heard. So this is back in the day, there was no social media or news outlets, right? This is how news would get spread across the land, through the Bedouins and through these kind of caravans. So caravans would exchange information. Okay, what do you hear about the city? What do you hear? What's happening over there? Blah blah blah. So and also it shows that at some point, this is something that we learn from this narration. It's kind of between the lines. At some point, Abdullah ibn al-Urayqit left. The guide who was supposed to lead them from Cave of Thawr to Yathrib probably took them to a place where khalas, you guys know the rest of the way. So he just left them, because in this narration he does not mention. He doesn't mention that, oh, the man asks, who are all of these people with you? He just asks, who is that guy with you? So, and that is Prophet Muhammad. It also shows that they were traveling, they were not hiding their faces. Okay, so Abu Bakr Siddiq, Prophet Muhammad, because how would a man recognize how would a man recognize Abu Bakr Siddiq if he had, his face wrapped in a turban or something, right? So so these are all different narrations or different incidents that happened from the cave of Thawr to Medina. And so we'll probably mention some of the more details of the arrival to Medina, inshallah, next week. But for now, we'll just conclude with why did they choose Medina? So when Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, clearly he has a backup, which is Abyssinia. This was from several years back. He already had it. Khalas, yani this is a good place. We can go there. The Muslims are there, can live there comfortably and whatnot. Why would they choose Medina? Well, several reasons. So we're going to talk about some of the reasons, and also and at the same time mention some of the blessings of Medina that we should honestly be aware of, because they, of course, exist to this day. Yathrib, the what's the word here? The geology, I guess, of Yathrib is unique. That it is, the soil of it is fertile. There is underground water. And this is why, to this day, you'll find date palm trees growing in Medina, because it's a fertile soil. Unlike Mecca, where nothing grows, unlike the rest of the desert, where basically nothing grows, in Yathrib, things grow, because just of the structure of Yathrib in general. This is from the underground, but even from the outside, you have the volcanic plains. Okay, so you have two volcanic plains, which are very rocky and very difficult to travel on top of. So these served as a natural protection to the city of Yathrib. So this is of the reasons, and in fact, this was shown even clearer in the Battle of Al-Khandaq, the Battle of the Trench, which is still a while from now. But we get to see that Medina in itself has a natural protection. It is protected from two sides from these volcanic plains, such that an army cannot cross over. And on another side, they had a very thick forests, or not forests, thick plantations of date palm groves. So once again, it's difficult for our army to pass through, leaving only one side. And that was one, of course, the Battle of the Trench. They decided that we need to protect this one side. Let's make a trench so that nobody can access Medina. But the point is, it had a natural protection. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ also had a love for Medina. And this is something we're going to mention next week, inshallah, that some of the Sahaba, some of the Muhajirun, when they arrived in Medina, they didn't like it. They struggled, they felt homesick. Some of them actually became sick. And they got like fevers and high temperatures and whatnot. And Prophet Muhammad ﷺ made a special dua, which effects are still present to this day. And he made a dua that, oh Allah, allow us to love Medina the same way that we love Mecca, or even more than this. And bless us in its land and its plantation and its harvest. So Medina is a blessed land, and subhanallah, every single Muslim loves Medina. Whether you've been to Medina or whether you haven't been to Medina, every single Muslim, they have a love towards Medina. Medina also has the mountain of Uhud. And Prophet ﷺ says, when he one time passed by the mountain of Uhud, Uhud, Jabalun yuhibbuna wa nuhibbuh. This is a mountain that we love, and the mountain loves us as well. So it is actually from a person's iman to love the mountain of Uhud. And in another hadith, these are all authentic hadith, على أنقاب المدينة ملائكة لا يدخلها الطاعون ولا الدجال. That Medina is protected by angels. The gates of Medina are protected by angels. When Dajjal tries to come in, because Dajjal is going to travel everywhere, all the major cities, and he's going to try to enter Medina, but he will not be able to because it is guarded by angels. And similarly, the plague, you know what the plague is, right? At-ta'un. The plague will not enter Medina, will not afflict Medina. And Prophet Muhammad ﷺ also established Medina as a haram. At one point in time, he says, "Inna Ibrahim harrama Makkah wa da'a laha." That Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, he made a dua for Mecca, and he asked Allah to make it a haram. And so he says, I too am also making dua to Allah Azza wa Jal to make Medina a haram. And we previously mentioned and explained what does a haram mean, right? So when the word haram comes from the word haram, right, which means forbidden. So certain things are forbidden in the haram, which are normally allowed outside, such as hunting, such as plucking even a leaf. It's not allowed inside the haram. So Medina is a haram. And by the way, it's a misconception that Masjid al-Aqsa is a haram. It's not a haram. It's a blessed place. It's a sacred location. Okay, it's a Mubarak place, but it is not a haram. The haram are only two places. That is Mecca and Medina. In another hadith as well, إن الإيمان لا يأرز إلى المدينة كما تأرز الحية إلى جحرها. That Iman rushes to Medina just like a desert snake would rush back into its hole. Meaning that if Islam is ever facing trouble around the world, Iman will always remain in Medina. Even at later times at the time of Dajjal and whatnot, Iman will be found in Medina. Also, we learn from an authentic hadith, Medina is protected from the plot of anyone who plots against it. Any enemy who plans anything against Medina, their plan will not succeed. He says, صحيح البخاري لا يكيد أهل المدينة أحد إلا انماع كما ينماع الملح في الماء. Anyone who plots anything against Medina, their plot will dissolve just like salt dissolves in water. And in another book of hadith, it also adds something else. من أخاف أهل المدينة ظالما لهم أخافه الله وكانت عليه لعنة الله. Whoever does a crime in Medina intending to harm the people or does some sort of innovation to misguide the people, then Allah Azza wa Jal shall make him, shall curse him. كانت عليه لعنة الله. He shall have the curse of Allah. And Medina, of course, it is a blessed place to live in. There's a hadith that says, "Al-Madinatu khayran lahum law kanu ya'lamun." If any of you guys have visited Medina, if you come from the airport, Medina airport, as soon as you leave the airport, I don't know if you guys noticed this, there's a big sign, and it has this hadith: "Al-Madinatu khayran lahum law kanu ya'lamun." Medina is better for them if only they knew. And subhanallah, um, this is يعني a status that Allah Azza wa Jal has given the people of Medina, and nobody leaves Medina except Allah Azza wa Jal replaces him with someone who wants to be in Medina. And living in Medina does need patience. It's not an easy place to live in overall. It has very hot weather, and it can get very chilly and very cold as well. And even back in the day, outside the dates and the harvest season, life was overall difficult for them. And he also says, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Man istata'a an yamuta bil madinati falyamut biha." Whoever is able to die in Medina, let him die in Medina. فَإِنِّي أَشْفَعُ لِمَنْ يَمُوتُ بِهَا. Because I shall intercede for anyone who dies in Medina. And therefore, you should all make dua that if you were to pass away in Medina. And of course, anyone who dies today in Medina, they're immediately buried in Al-Baqi'. And of course, Al-Baqi' is the blessed graveyard. It has a graves of over 10,000 Sahaba, the Baqi' al-Gharqad, right next to the Masjid al-Nabawi. And as well as all as the wives of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not all of them, but almost all of them. And his son Ibrahim is also buried there, and his grandson, and his great grandson, and his great great grandson, and Imam al-Shafi'i, and Safiya, and Uthman al-Affan. So you have all of these great people who are all buried in Baqi' al-Gharqad. And it is mentioned also in a separate narration that one time, this is towards the end of his life, he woke up in the middle of the night, and he went to Baqi' al-Gharqad, and he made a dua for the people who were passed away in Baqi' al-Gharqad, because it is a blessed graveyard. And as a side note, it's interesting the dua that Umar al-Khattab also made. And he says the dua that Prophet Umar al-Khattab he made, where he says, "Oh Allah, grant me shahada, and Allah grant me the ability to die in Medina," which is two contradicting statements. How do you get shahada while you are in Medina? If you want shahada, you got to leave Medina. Yet, subhanallah, his intention was pure, and Allah Azza wa Jalla granted him shahada inside Medina. But anyways, also, we already mentioned the Aus and the Khazraj, and the fact that they were struggling with the wars of Bu'ath. And this wars of Bu'ath caused, of course, corruption in the land. But Aisha radiallahu anha, she calls it was a gift to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why? Because it raised a strong generation. They were strong tribes. They knew how to fight, and they were overall independent, and they were proud about their strength. And how much time do we have? Okay. And also, I think we mentioned this before, but if you look at the lineage of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you'll find that at one point his ancestors were from the Khazraj as well. And Abd al-Muttalib, he was originally in Yathrib, and then he was captured, and then he was taken to Mecca, and then we mentioned that story way back, right? So now he is brought back to, so he has some lineage there as well, and he has some distant cousins over there, and we're going to talk about those as well. And last point, and inshallah we'll mention, and then we'll wrap up, is that the presence of the Arab and the Yahud. We already mentioned some of the benefits, that it allowed the Khazraj to accept Islam easier, because they were familiar with the concept of a prophet. They were familiar with the concept of a scripture, of of a Sharia, of halal and haram, because they lived next door to the Jewish people. So that made it easier for them to accept the message of Islam. And even the fact that the Jewish people were there, even though it did have, of course, its downsides, there were times where it had its upsides, its advantages, and especially when later on the Muslims would come to conquer these tribes. The Jewish people, they had a lot of wealth. And subhanAllah, to this day, the richest people in the world are the Jewish people. People from the families, the Jewish families from Jewish heritage. And so there were a lot of trouble between the Arabs and the Jews, but not only did that help them, empower them to embrace Islam, but also it would be a source of income for them later on in the seerah. So all of these are different reasons as to why he chose Medina. And whereas Abyssinia is a little bit more difficult to get to as well. Abyssinia is a distance, is a further away. It's not in the Arabian Peninsula really anymore. You have to go, you have to take a ship, and you have to cross over, and now you're in a different land under a different rule. Whereas the Arabs, it was easier for them to interact with all of these different caravans. And of course, it would be easier for them to also spread the message of Islam in a place that doesn't really have any foundation in it, right? So all of these are, and of course, there's many, many more, but I think these are all sufficient reasons for why he chose Yathrib to migrate to versus something like Abyssinia, and all of the blessings of Medina as well, which we will also, inshallah, emphasize more in the future lectures. But inshallah, we'll just stop here. And next week, we will, bi'idhnillah, talk about the incident of the arrival to Medina. How did the Aus and the Khazraj know that Prophet ﷺ arrived? What did they do when they arrived? And what was going on? We will talk about that all next week, bi'idhnillah. So we'll pause here for any questions. In Mecca, so the Dajjal will also not be able to enter Mecca. Yeah. So, but the angels part, it's mentioned specifically for Medina. Any other? Yeah. So when was the name changed? Most likely after his migration. No, just because it's like Al Madinah Al Munawwara. It translates to the enlightened city, meaning it wasn't enlightened before. Something happened to it that caused it to become enlightened. And so this is why most likely, very shortly after the hijrah of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, it was changed, renamed, not called Yathrib anymore, especially after all of them pretty much converted. It was known as Al Madinatul Munawwara. I will have to look into it, wallahi. Wallahi, I'm not sure. I would have to look into that, to be honest. Any other questions? Yes? Not the whole time, no. So it's again, so these narrations don't really specify. So we kind of have to just read between the lines. We know that he joined them, of course, after the third night in the cave of Thawr. And he took them. And then the books of Seerah, by the way, I didn't mention this, but the books of Seerah, they mention specifically the route that they took. This long paragraph. They went from this place to this place, from this place to this place. Many of these places don't even exist anymore now, but they were like from here to here, from here to here, from here to here. So these places, they were probably being guided by Abdullah ibn Urayqit. But as I mentioned earlier, in one of the narrations, it appears that at some point, Abdullah ibn Urayqit, probably when they were closer, he said, "Khalas, my job is done. You guys know the way from here. You don't need me anymore." So he was not mentioned in the narration. The narration of Abu Bakr, you mean the... So he didn't mention. So it's possible that he was there with them, but he just didn't talk about him, right? So this is one of the difficulties. Again, when you have all of these narrations, you don't know what happened when, what happened when. So you have different books of Seerah that try to give you a certain chronology of events and who was there and who was not there. Did this person travel with them? Was he there with them the whole time? Any other questions? Yes. They would have. It depends. Yeah. So inside Medina, they're not allowed. So they're inside the boundaries of the Haram. which is mentioned to us in the hadith, that it is a haram between Ain and Thawr, two mountains called Ain and Thawr, and the two volcanic plains. That area is the haram. Outside that, you can go and hunt and do whatever, right? And of course, now there are certain exceptions. Okay, so for example, you're not allowed to cut trees or cut plants, but obviously, if you want to do construction, you're gonna cut trees and plants. So certain exceptions are made for certain situations, but there are general rules that apply that everybody's expected to follow. Any other questions as well? We have 5 more minutes for Qama. Okay. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. We'll see you next week, inshallah.